Nawaz Sharif and Nicki Minaj stood side by side in the eerie silence of the crumbling, abandoned castle in Austria, their footsteps echoing off the stone floors as they wandered deeper into the labyrinth of forgotten corridors. The grandiose facade of the place had initially sparked their curiosity, and despite the disrepair, it held an almost haunting allure. The ancient tapestries on the walls fluttered as if stirred by some invisible force, while the air was thick with the smell of dust and age. Nicki, ever the bold, brushed it off with a playful smirk, tossing a quip about the castle's haunted vibes. But Nawaz, ever the cautious, felt an unsettling chill creep down his spine. They had been following the cryptic map left by the mysterious guide who had given them only vague instructions, but something felt off. There was an electricity in the air, a sensation that seemed to pulse beneath their skin. As they stepped into the center of what looked like an ancient chamber, a sudden, soft hum filled the room, so low that it almost seemed like the vibrations were coming from deep within the earth itself. Nicki stopped in her tracks, her playful demeanor faltering for the first time as she scanned the room with wide eyes. Nawaz's heart skipped a beat. The walls around them seemed to warp, the ancient stone twisting and shifting as if alive. At first, he thought it was his mind playing tricks on him, but then, the air rippled. It was as if the very fabric of reality had stretched and folded before them. A swirling vortex of light and shadow began to form in the center of the room, a glowing, pulsating orb that seemed to beckon them in with an irresistible pull. Time seemed to slow. Nawaz's breath caught in his throat, his fingers instinctively reaching out toward the phenomenon, but Nicki, her eyes wide and filled with disbelief, stepped back with a sharp intake of air, her normally confident swagger replaced by a moment of uncertainty. "What the hell is that?" she whispered, her voice trembling with something she rarely allowed to surface, fear. Nawaz, despite the creeping terror, felt an unexplainable compulsion to move forward. His mind raced with thoughts of what this could mean, but there was no time to process. Before he could speak, the air crackled, and a blinding light shot out from the vortex, engulfing them both. It was like falling through a tunnel, every sense heightening in a dizzying whirlwind as they were pulled into a dimension that felt entirely foreign. The ground beneath them seemed to vanish, and for a moment, they were weightless, suspended in a place where nothing made sense. They were no longer in the castle was gone. The surroundings had transformed into something out of a dream, or rather a nightmare. A vast, open landscape with a sky swirling in unnatural hues, filled with shifting constellations and floating islands. The air smelled metallic, thick with a strange kind of energy, and distant echoes of thunder rumbled. It was calm, but at the same time, unnervingly chaotic in its strangeness. Nicki, her heart racing, clutched at her chest, her instincts screaming at her to run, but her feet seemed frozen to the ground. Nawaz, though equally stunned, found his composure beginning to return. His mind worked rapidly, trying to piece together what had just happened. They were in another world. It was unfathomable, yet here they were. Nicki shot him a look, her face a mixture of confusion and disbelief, and for a split second, they both shared a silent understanding. They were completely alone, with no idea how to get back. But there was something in Nicki's eyes, a flicker of determination, that reminded Nawaz of his own sense of duty and resilience. She wasn't one to back down from anything, and as strange and terrifying as this was, she would face it head-on. Nawaz, too, found his resolve hardening. He had dealt with political storms and unimaginable pressure back home, but this was different. This was something far greater, a puzzle that could change everything they knew. There was no fear in his heart, just a cold resolve to figure out what was going on. As the two of them exchanged a glance, the tension was palpable, but neither spoke, understanding that words would mean little in the face of this new, bizarre reality. Around them, the world shifted again, the colors of the sky bending in unnatural patterns. The adventure had begun, and though they didn't know what awaited them, the questions swirled like a storm in their minds. How would they survive this place? What forces had drawn them here? And most crucially, how would they escape? As the initial shock of their surreal surroundings began to wear off, Nawaz and Nicki found themselves standing in the eerie quiet of this strange, alien landscape, the gravity of their situation sinking in. They looked at each other, their faces betraying a mix of curiosity and disbelief, as the realization dawned that the usual rules of the world no longer applied. Nicki, always quick to react, was the first to speak, though her voice was tight with apprehension. "We need to figure out what this place is, Nawaz. We can't just stand here." He nodded, though his mind was racing, trying to comprehend what had happened, why they were here, and how they could possibly return home. The air was thick with an electric charge, humming with an energy that both intrigued and unnerved them. Their surroundings felt like they were trapped between two realities, a dream and a nightmare, and every step they took seemed to pull them deeper into the unknown. They began walking, cautiously at first, their eyes scanning the bizarre landscape, a jagged, rocky terrain with twisted trees that seemed to shimmer in and out of existence. The horizon was dotted with strange, floating structures, some resembling enormous geometric shapes, others like massive, cracked glass spires. As they moved forward, the ground beneath them felt uneven, and their senses were assaulted by the unfamiliar. The air smelled metallic, thick with the scent of something alien and unsettling. They encountered their first obstacle soon enough, a vast chasm that split the land before them, its depths hidden in a swirling, foggy abyss. The chasm seemed to stretch endlessly, its edges impossibly sharp and jagged. There was no way around it, and they had no tools or equipment to help them cross. It was a moment of physical impossibility, but Nawaz, ever the strategist, remained calm, thinking through their options. Nicki, on the other hand, felt her heart racing, the weight of their situation finally sinking in. "How do we get across this? What do we do?" she asked, her voice laced with frustration and fear. Nawaz, with his political composure, fought back his own rising sense of panic, but he could see that Nicki, though tough on the outside, was beginning to crack. The uncertainty of it all, the suddenness of their arrival in this hostile realm, was taking its toll on both of them. It was not just a physical challenge, it was mental and emotional, testing their resolve. They stood at the edge, unsure of what to do, when a strange, soft light began to flicker in the distance. Without a word, they turned and started toward it, compelled by a strange pull. As they drew closer, the light revealed itself to be coming from a small, ancient structure resembling a temple or shrine, nestled in the heart of a cluster of strange, pulsating plants. They approached cautiously, but as they reached the entrance, they were greeted by a figure, tall, cloaked in a flowing robe, with an ethereal glow emanating from beneath the hood. The figure spoke in a language they couldn't understand, but somehow, they both felt the words penetrate their minds, as though the meaning was being transmitted directly to their thoughts. The being's voice was soft, almost melodic, but its meaning was clear. They had entered a realm of great power, and the answers they sought would only be given if they proved themselves worthy. At that moment, the weight of the situation hit Nawaz harder than ever. He was no longer just a politician or a leader. He was a stranger in a foreign land, caught in a puzzle far beyond his comprehension. His eyes flicked to Nicki, whose face was a mix of skepticism and determination. "What do we do?" she asked again, her tone more demanding than before. Nawaz swallowed, his mind now clear. This wasn't just about getting back home. It was about surviving, understanding the forces at play, and navigating a reality where every decision could mean life or death. As they ventured deeper into the shrine, the challenges grew more complex. The very air seemed to change with every step, filling their lungs with an unknown energy that made them feel lightheaded and disoriented. At one point, they found themselves in a vast chamber filled with mirrors that reflected not only their physical selves but twisted, distorted versions of their thoughts and fears, visions of their pasts, their regrets, their failures. Nicki flinched at the sight of her reflection, momentarily paralyzed by the haunting images that played out in front of her. Nawaz, too, struggled to maintain his composure as memories of his political career, the betrayals, the compromises, began to surface. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if this was some kind of test, a way to break them before they could move forward. But then, as quickly as it had appeared, the visions faded, and they were left standing in an empty, cold room. This was only the beginning, Nawaz realized. There were more trials ahead, more dangers lurking in this new reality. And with every step they took, the questions multiplied. Who had brought them here? Why were they chosen? What power lay behind this realm? Each answer led to more confusion, and every turn brought new enemies, as shadowy figures appeared in the distance, watching them from behind the haze. Their journey, it seemed, was just beginning, and as they pressed on, they realized the stakes were higher than they could have ever imagined. The danger was not just in the world around them, but within themselves as they began to question their own motivations, fears, and desires. Each step forward was both a triumph and a new uncertainty, and in the vast unknown, they were not just seeking answers, they were discovering who they truly were. As they stood at the edge of the towering cliff that overlooked the swirling vortex of energy, the final confrontation loomed ahead like an inevitable storm. The air was thick with anticipation, and the sky above seemed to crack and pulse with a foreboding light, the culmination of everything they had encountered since being pulled into this bizarre world. Nawaz and Nicki, though physically drained and emotionally battered by the trials they had endured, knew that this was the moment that would define everything. They exchanged a glance, each of them carrying the weight of the choices that had led them here, and the realization that there was no turning back. They had no choice but to face the entity that had orchestrated their arrival in this strange, dimension-shifting reality, a being of immense power, a creature that had been slowly revealing its presence through cryptic symbols, whispers in the air, and the strange energy that had pulsed in every corner of their journey. This entity, they now understood, wasn't simply a physical foe. It was the embodiment of the realm itself, an ancient force that controlled everything, weaving the fabric of reality with its malevolent will. The very land seemed to bend and twist at its command, a manifestation of pure chaos and destruction. But there was a weakness, something they had uncovered through their trials. The entity was not invincible. It was bound to this place, its strength drawn from the very fabric of the realm, but its control was fractured. There were cracks in its power, moments when it faltered, those fleeting glimpses of vulnerability they had seen in the creature's presence, times when it seemed almost human, revealing cracks in its otherwise impenetrable exterior. They could exploit that. They had to. In their final preparations, Nicki and Nawaz took a moment to gather the remnants of their resolve, the scraps of courage that had carried them through the journey. Nawaz adjusted his stance, his mind now focused not on the overwhelming fear that had plagued him at the beginning, but on the strategy that had served him throughout his life: assess, adapt, and confront with clarity. He knew that their best chance lay in a two-pronged attack. They would need to disrupt the entity's connection to the realm while simultaneously confronting its physical manifestation. Nicki, ever the risk-taker, felt her heart racing, but beneath the surface, her energy was a strange calmness. The countless battles she had fought, on stages, in public eyes, and even within her own mind, had prepared her for this. She didn't fear the unknown, she thrived on it. She had spent too long running from challenges in her life, and now, it was time to face the ultimate one. "We move together," she said, her voice low, steady, as if rehearsing for something far greater than the chaos they had seen before. Nawaz nodded, appreciating the unspoken understanding between them. They gathered their few remaining tools, the ancient relics they had discovered in the shrine, items that hummed with the same energy they now felt coursing through the air. The staff of light, the crystalline dagger, the stone amulet, all had strange, unknowable properties, and they hoped they might provide the key to destabilizing the entity's hold on the realm. In that moment of silence before the storm, they knew they had one shot. There was no second chance. They couldn't afford to hesitate. The world around them seemed to breathe with them, the tension building as the winds began to swirl faster, the vortex now raging with an intensity that mirrored the rising uncertainty in their hearts. They didn't know what the final battle would look like, but they were prepared to sacrifice everything. Their personal fears, regrets, and doubts. They pushed them aside, for now, knowing that this was the moment that defined all moments. It was do or die, win or lose, and nothing else mattered. Nicki gripped the amulet tightly, feeling a surge of warmth from within, while Nawaz steeled himself, the weight of leadership grounding him in the face of something far greater than any political adversary he had ever faced. Together, they approached the swirling abyss, ready to face whatever monstrous form would materialize at the other end. They had learned so much, But what they hadn't learned was how far they would be pushed, how much they could sacrifice, and whether they had the strength to break the very fabric of reality itself. The calm before the storm felt like a suspended breath, an agonizing wait before they would charge forward, into the unknown, against an enemy that could erase them and everything they had fought for, with a single thought. The moment of truth arrived with a deafening silence as the entity, a being of pure, chaotic energy, materialized before them. It was a swirling mass of shadow, light, and fracturing reality, a manifestation of every nightmare and fear they had encountered since arriving in this strange world. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the air crackled with a force that threatened to tear them apart. Nawaz and Nicki stood their ground, facing the full force of the challenge they had been preparing for since the very beginning. The creature's voice, if it could be called that, reverberated in their minds, not in words, but in an overwhelming sensation of everything, the weight of every regret, every fear, every choice they had ever made. It was as if the entity knew their deepest vulnerabilities, and it was using that knowledge to break them. "You cannot defeat me," it whispered, its voice like a storm. "You are nothing but fleeting beings, destined to fade into the void." The words hit Nicki like a physical blow, her mind racing, the full weight of the challenge settling in. But Nawaz, though shaken, refused to be moved. He gripped the amulet tightly, his mind clear with the strategy he had planned. There had to be a way to disrupt the entity's hold on this realm, to sever the connection it had to the very fabric of reality. He turned to Nicki, their eyes locking for a brief, powerful moment of understanding, and without another word, they launched themselves into the fray. It wasn't just a physical battle, it was a battle of wits, willpower, and emotional resilience. They had to find a way to destabilize the entity's control while fighting off the relentless barrage of mental and emotional attacks it hurled at them. The ground cracked and split beneath them as the entity unleashed its full power, creating illusions and horrors designed to break them. Nicki was forced to confront her past, the moments of weakness and doubt she had buried for years, her failures, her insecurities, her fear of being unworthy. Nawaz, too, found himself trapped in a sea of his own past mistakes, betrayals, compromises, moments of moral conflict. The battle was as much within them as it was against the entity. With every illusion that tried to tear them apart, they had to fight not just the entity's power but their own self-doubt. But in the midst of the chaos, Nicki found clarity. She realized that the only way to defeat the entity was to let go of the fear that had always held her back. She stopped fighting the illusions, stopped running from them, and instead embraced them, using their energy to fuel her next move. Nawaz, seeing the shift in Nicki's resolve, followed suit. He let go of his need to control, his obsession with strategy, and allowed himself to tap into the raw power of the realm itself, trusting the tools they had discovered along the way. The relics, the amulet, the staff. With one final, desperate effort, they struck. The staff of light connected with the core of the entity's being, and the energy that surged from the relics split the very fabric of the realm. The entity screamed, its form destabilizing, twisting and writhing as its connection to the world weakened. But as the battle raged on, Nawaz and Nicki knew that the cost of victory would be steep. With every ounce of energy they poured into their final attack, they felt a part of themselves unravel, a piece of their very souls being torn away. But they pushed forward, knowing that this was the only way to protect the world they had come to understand. The final blow came when the entity's form shattered into 1,000 shards of light, each piece falling away into nothingness. The sky above them cleared, the swirling vortex of energy dissipating, and the land began to settle. But the victory was bittersweet. The price they had paid was immense. Nawaz felt a weight in his chest, a loss that couldn't be explained, while Nicki was left reeling from the emotional toll of what they had just endured. As the dust settled and the world around them began to heal, they realized that they had changed. They were no longer the people who had arrived in this realm, uncertain and afraid. They had been forged in the fire of this journey, and though they had defeated the entity, they had sacrificed pieces of themselves along the way. But the world, too, had changed. The realm was no longer a place of chaos and destruction. It had stabilized, transformed into something that was both new and familiar, a bridge between worlds. As they returned to the castle, now a monument to their struggle, they knew that the lessons they had learned, about fear, about strength, and about sacrifice, would stay with them forever. They had saved the realm, but at what cost? The emotional and psychological scars would remain, and though they had emerged victorious, they were forever altered. But as they looked at each other, there was a quiet understanding between them. They had faced the ultimate test, and though they were changed, they had survived. And that survival meant that they had won something even greater than the battle itself. Their journey had shaped them in ways they would never fully understand, and as they stepped into the future, they knew that they would carry the weight of this experience with them, forever. Now, it's your turn. If you've made it this far, don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling adventures and unforgettable journeys.